Oh, hello, everyone. I'm hoping everyone can see and hear us. We are getting started with this Sunday's Screenside Chat with children with diabetes. And today we are joined by Phyllisa Deroze, who is hanging out either above me or beside me or beneath me. I'm not sure how the video looks to everyone else. But we are really glad that you guys are joining us. And we're going to give people a few minutes to jump in. Phyllisa has a presentation that she'll be giving, but we'll give people a few minutes to join in. And as you guys are all joining, please make sure that you are participating in the chat. So while she's presenting, you guys can ask some questions. And Phyllisa, before I awkwardly read your bio that I have printed out here, do you want to say anything?
I'm just excited to be here and to have this opportunity to share my story. It means a lot to see my smiling face at this point, which in my presentation, you'll understand better why I said that.
Well, we are going to get started. I didn't introduce myself, and I should have done that. My name is Carrie Sparling. I've had type 1 diabetes for 34 years. I keep forgetting how long I've had diabetes, which says how long I've had diabetes. And I'm the editorial director at Children with Diabetes. And today I'm extremely pleased to be joined by Phyllisa. I'm going to read her bio so I don't leave anything off of it. So Phyllisa is a global diabetes patient advocate from, it gives a state that you are no longer in, so I will let you tell that story as you see fit afterwards. She began blogging at diagnosenotdefeated.com almost immediately after being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2011. Last summer, however, she learned that she has type 1 diabetes and spent the last 8 years misdiagnosed. And that's actually why you're here to talk to us today, to tell us that story. So I'm really excited to have you share that. In addition to her blog, she founded Black Diabetic Info, a website dedicated to increasing cultural competent diabetes information. Phyllisa has graced the cover of Health Monitor magazine, has been featured in Diabetic Living, Diabetes Focus, and other magazines and newsletters. Her passion for diabetes lifestyle advocacy, I love that phrase, can be seen in her YouTube vlogs, social media posts, in-person workshops, published essays, and keynote speeches that she has given in 5 countries. Her motto, diagnosed, not defeated, is an inspiration, truly, for anyone diagnosed with diabetes and takes on new meaning for her after being diagnosed with diabetes twice. So Phyllisa, thank you for joining us. And we've got some people in the chat who are saying hi. Oh, you already saw them, so we're off to a good start. So whenever you're ready, do your thing.
Okay, I'm going to now share my screen.
And I'm going to disappear just from video while you're doing your talk.
Okay. So thank you so very much for that wonderful introduction. And it's always a pleasure to hear the bio, because we often deal with things of like, oh, I don't do anything. And then when someone reads your bio, it's like, yeah, you do a lot. So I am honored today to talk to you about being diagnosed with diabetes twice. Here are my blog, Instagram handles, and Twitter handles where you can find me. So here's my LADA story. My LADA story is an interesting one, but one that I'm finding to be more common than I particularly thought. For those who don't know what LADA is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, and it's also known as type 1.5. As you can see from the picture on the left, my motto, diagnosed, not defeated. This is how I was living my life. And then last September, I found out I was in fact misdiagnosed, but I'm still not defeated. So making that switch from diagnosed, not defeated to misdiagnosed. So today I want to share with you my particular story. These are the dates that we're dealing with. February 2011, this picture of me was taken from the hospital. I had DKA at that time. My symptoms were extreme thirst, fatigue, weight loss. I had a defiant yeast infection. I had a sweet smelling body odor. I find that when people talk about DKA, we often miss this one about the body odor, but it's so important because honestly, I had no idea what was going on. I was just like, I'm smelling like dandelions and cantaloupe, and and it was actually a problem. So whenever I talk about symptoms of high glucose, I do like to say sweet smelling body odor, because again, prior to my diagnosis, I was not aware that that was the symptom. I had passed out unconscious in my bathtub the night before I went to the emergency room. By the time I got to the emergency room, my blood sugar was 603. And that was after my primary care physician at that time had given me a shot of insulin, which I didn't know what it was. I just knew I passed out in my bathtub, my symptoms have increased, and something's wrong with me. So I packed a bag and left my home. And I was just determined to not return home until someone told me what is exactly wrong with me. By the time I got to the emergency room, I was in a wheelchair and I was fading in and out. I took this selfie and sent it to my husband, who was living in France at the time. I was in North Carolina, because I thought this would be the last selfie that I had taken. And so I literally snapped this picture and I told my husband, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know that I'm dying. And so I'm gonna just snap this picture. I am wearing a mask, but only because I heard someone coughing really badly. And I thought, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know what it's not. And so I just put the mask on because I was like, I don't want whatever they have. So in between the two diagnoses, this is what happened. I was diagnosed from the hospital. I was put on insulin for about 6 months. Within 9 months, I was off all medication. And I managed my diabetes with diet and exercise only for nearly 3 years. During that time, when I was managing diabetes with just diet and exercise only, my A1C was 5.5, 5.4 consistently. I remember some people, random people, you know, they wanted to tell me that I had reversed my diabetes or that I didn't have diabetes anymore, right? I never subscribed to that language because I thought that it would be dangerous. I do just want to say this is my first time publicly talking about my misdiagnosis, and so it's still emotional for me. So if I cry, just kind of bear with me, but I feel myself reliving the moment. So I do want to say that I make no apologies for crying at all. Diabetes has definitely taught me that I'm not embarrassed. I just want to let you know. That I never subscribed to that language because I had seen that kind of language be harmful to people. Again, at this time, I'm thinking I was diagnosed with type 2. And I had seen people, I grew up in a Pentecostal church in Florida, and people would come to church and testify that God had cured them of diabetes. And then years later, they're on dialysis or they need an amputation. And so I just never subscribed to that. And knowing now that I have LADA and I was misdiagnosed, I'm very thankful for that. That anytime when someone said to me, oh, you don't have diabetes anymore, I was like, no, it's still there. I'm just managing it, you know, this particular way. I was put back on insulin during my pregnancy, and throughout 9 years, 8 years, 8.5, I was giving various types of medication for people living with type 2, GLP-1s, SGLT2s, metformin, just a host of things. Then we move over to September 2019. This is how I felt. This image pretty much captures the anger that I felt with the diagnosis. My symptoms were elevated blood sugar. I had noticed going back to about January 2018 that my A1C, like there was a pattern in my A1C and it was increasing. And I didn't particularly like the increase, right? Given the fact that I had managed my diabetes for nearly 3 years with just diet and exercise consistently 5.4, 5.5. So I was like very familiar and happy with that range. And then I'm noticing that I'm like 6'8", 6'9", 7, 7'2", 7'4", like it just keeps increasing. By the time last summer came around, I had lost probably 25 pounds for no good reason, and probably 15 for a good reason. I had run a 5K, it was my birthday, so I was really trying, but there was some weight loss that I couldn't necessarily account for. Because I had DKA before, I was familiar with it. I saw things rising, and I knew that I needed to see a doctor. So when I think about my care over the past 9 years, these are all the specialists that I've seen. My first endo was the person who diagnosed me when I left the hospital. So during my 6-day stay in the hospital, I was given pamphlets for both type 1 and type 2. They didn't know what kind of diabetes I had, and they told me that my blood work had to be sent to a lab in California, and it would be 10 days until it came back. So I wouldn't know what type of diabetes I had until I was discharged. So after being discharged, I met with my endo. He told me I had type 2. Then years later, he left his practice. I had a second endo. I moved abroad. I had an endo at a diabetes center, and they did what I thought was a complete blood work, test for me. Then once I became pregnant, I had another endocrinologist, same clinic, but this endocrinologist specialized in pregnancy. And this endo remained my endo until last year, this year, January, when I moved from being abroad. Then there was a fourth endo that I asked to have antibody testing from when endo number 4, so it should be 4, sorry, my numbers are wrong here. So this endo did not want to do antibody testing, so I got a second opinion. In the end, it was my OBGYN who agreed to do antibody testing. I just want to say, I used this really cute template, and all the physicians were male doctors, but that was not my experience. So I just want to say that, like, hello, people who are making this template, there are women medical physicians. So anyway, it was my OBGYN who, in fact, agreed to do antibody testing for me. So why was I even asking for antibody testing? So the first thing is, we all know Cherise has LADA. Like, she's very upfront about, my name is Cherise and I have LADA. So the first time I probably heard about LADA was from her, but the first time I had met someone who was misdiagnosed, it was Mike Durbin, right? And we met at a conference, and he shared that he was in fact misdiagnosed and he has LADA. And I was like, what is that? And because I admire Mike as a diabetes advocate, I was thinking to myself, well, if it happened to Mike, it might happen to me. And so I wanted to know, like, what is this testing? So he was the first person that I asked, like, how did you know you had LADA, and what were the tests that you should ask for? So at some point around maybe 2017, I asked my endocrinologist for the GAD65 antibody testing after Mike told me that's what he had gotten done. And you're on the call, so I hope I'm not telling too much of your business, Mike. But so I asked, and I remember texting Mike, like, Mike, I'm gonna ask her. And then she was like, no, you don't need it. So I moved on. So these dates are about when I started consistently asking to have antibody testing. And this is the moment in which that happened. So these pictures are taken from World Diabetes Day 2018. I was giving one of my workshops to a room of physicians. So everyone that you see in this, in the pictures, my audience, these are all physicians from the MENA region. So the Middle East, Africa. And while I shared my diagnosis story prior to getting into this mealtime activity, at the end of it, during the Q&A, some of the physicians asked if I had heard of LADA, because my diagnosis story sounded to them more like 1.5 type 1 than type 2. So I said, yeah, I've heard about it, but like, you know, I don't know all the intricacies. And when I think back to the amount of endocrinologists that I've been under the care, I would think that I've had the test done. So this was my answer publicly in this forum. And during the lunchtime, one of the physicians, I think she was from Tunisia, she came up to me and she said, you really need to find out if you have LADA, and don't stop until you find the answer. So I put that down there because it was like haunting, like when she said, don't stop until you find the answer. I'm so glad she said that, because I realize now that perhaps she knew it would be difficult. I didn't know it would be difficult. I'm thinking, okay, I'll just go ask. And that's what I told her. I was like, okay, I'll ask my endo. I have an appointment like tomorrow or this week. It was really quick, around World Diabetes Day. So I go in November and like, hey, can I have testing for type 1 diabetes, antibodies? And she's like, why do you want testing for antibodies? And I said, well, you know, I was given this workshop, a room full of physicians. They just heard my story and said that it would be nice to know if I've had antibody testing. So can I get the antibody testing? My endo at the time pulled up my charts. You know, I had been in her care like 6 years, so she pulls it up and she's like, well, I'm looking at your A1C, Phylisa, and like, no, there's no need to get antibody testing, right? Same thing she had said earlier. And then I'm like, okay. So I walk away, right? It's one of those things, you know, you ask and then you walk away. The next 3 months go by. It's February now. Again, that whole don't stop until you find the answer is like haunting me, because I realized like, well, I walked away and I still don't know. So I asked her again. I said, well, the last time I was here, I asked for the antibody testing and you said there was no need for it. I kind of want proof that I have type 2 diabetes. So can you look in my records and see if I had ever had antibody testing? So she's like, okay. She scrolls, she looks, she goes, no, you've never had antibody testing. And I was like, bingo, like, great. We know that I've never had it. Can you please test me for type 1 antibodies? At the time, I was particularly asking about the GAD65. And then I was once again met with no, there's no need. So May rolls around, she's out. I get an opportunity to ask the same thing of another endo. So I say to him, listen, I've asked for type 1 antibodies. My endo, who you know is out for today, she's looked and she said I never had the testing. So I'm here now asking for the testing. Will you run the test? He looks at my A1Cs. He does the same thing she does. He concludes there's no need for me to get any type 1 antibody testing. I clearly have type 2. And I said, but I don't have proof, right? Like, we know I have not had antibody testing. I really would like it. And then he goes, well, I have been an endocrinologist for a long time. He tells me about his degrees. This is when I realized, oh my God, this man is offended by me asking. He is literally taking my asking personally, saying that he doesn't know what he's doing. So I had to deal with that. And then he finally goes, well, I don't know if your insurance is going to pay for it, and you're going to have to pay out of pocket. And I'm like, okay, cool, no problem. I'll pay out of pocket. And then he goes, no, I'm not ordering the test. And that was like it. Like, it was very definitive. He's offended that I asked. There is no way he's going to order the test. This is May last year. I have my 40th birthday 5K, June. By the time July comes around, I am sick as a dog. I've lost the weight that I mentioned earlier. My blood sugar is extremely uncontrollable. No matter what I do, it's not coming down. We have a crisis. I go back to where I was living, and that's when I ask my my OBGYN if she would do it. I was practically breaking down in her office because I was like, no endocrinologist wants to do this test. And all I just want to know. And so she runs the test, comes back astronomical. If anyone knows about GAD-65 testing, the scale is 0 to 5. And I was at 7,205, something like that. Extremely off the charts. So my OBGYN told me to give the results to my endocrinologist. My endocrinologist says, you've got LADA. Stop taking all medication, come in and get insulin. You need to see the diabetes educator and the nutritionist about living with type 1 diabetes. I'm sorry, I missed it. So this was how I was diagnosed with LADA. I cried. I cried. Oh my God, did I cry. I thought I had no more tears for diabetes. I thought I had no more tears for diabetes, and all that time asking. I not only cried for myself, but I cried for all the people who have been told that they have type 2 diabetes, and then their physicians tell them that they're non-compliant or they're not taking their medication properly when they can't get their blood sugar down. Literally last summer, there was nothing on the face of the planet that I could do that would get my blood sugar down. I was not given insulin. And so like not eating was the only thing I knew what to do. And so like I cried for me and everybody else. I cried thinking about cousins that have passed away who might have had LADA, but were diagnosed with type 2, and maybe they didn't even know to ask for type 1 antibodies. You know, I cried for people who asked one time and was told no. And the only reason why I kept asking is because this woman said to me, don't stop until you find the answer. So I had to find a way to deal with it. And September 27th, I held a funeral for my pancreas. I put it on my YouTube channel as a way of healing myself. So I'm in my type 1 diabetes journey. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. Some people say they have LADA, some people say they have type 1, some people just say I have diabetes. So what I call myself and like, what does that mean in my diabetes management? 8 years type 2. Did I ever have type 2? Like, so right now I'm just in a world trying to figure out what all this means. But in my journey, I've learned that the words diabetes is not your fault. I've only read in type 1 material. So in all the years I've been diagnosed with diabetes, I've never read that. For the first time, I was given advice about food that wasn't filled with restrictions. For the first time, I didn't feel fat shamed or stigmatized. And so when we think about our community and things that we can do to help bridge what it's like when someone is diagnosed with diabetes, these are very simple things. Why isn't that sentence, diabetes is not your fault, found in type 2 material, right? Why should I have felt fat shamed or stigmatized when I was given material about being diagnosed with type 2? And this is a fun thing because I can eat oatmeal. I ate oatmeal. I have this poem about eating oatmeal. I was able to eat oatmeal for the first time since my pregnancy for 8 years because there was no way my blood sugar would ever come down from the spike of eating oatmeal. And so I love Jamaican beef patties, and I use this as an example of how do you eat a Jamaican beef patty when you're diagnosed with type 2. That's the blue screen there. You cut it in half, and you put a smile on your face, and you thank God that you're able to eat half of a Jamaican beef patty. Type 1, see the green picture? I can eat the whole thing. So I've literally gained about 20 pounds just because I am not very restricted in how I eat. And I say this to say, I see a lot of things in our type 1 community about people in our type 2 community that lacks empathy around what it means to be diagnosed with diabetes and to be given so many restrictions. Because as a person with type 1, I've been given no restrictions. But diagnosed with type 2, I feel like all I was ever given was restrictions. So I've come to the end of my presentation, and my joke is, I've always wanted to bridge the types, and God heard me. He told me, you are the bridge. And so my advocacy has gained a new angle, and I'm here for it because I'm diagnosed, not defeated. Thank you.
I'm popping back on, and you let me know. Do you want to stop sharing your screen, or actually,
Okay.
for people who are watching, we'll put that screen back up afterwards to make sure that you have a way to connect with Phyllisa. But it was weird because I wasn't on the camera, so you couldn't see me like nodding along with, and I'm taking notes also as you were talking, because something that really, well, the first thing that really jumped out at me was when you described smelling like dandelions and cantaloupe. I felt very weird for laughing at that, but like that is such a huge thing that someone would personally notice, and to not say that out loud to let people know that that could be a symptom that they're dealing with. Like, you made it sound so lovely, but I also knew where you were coming from. But in terms of the stigma, so diabetes is not your fault. And I was diagnosed as a child, so I heard a lot of that growing up. But can you just kind of revisit that a little bit? Because in the chat, Mike Durbin is in here with us, and he had added that there's a real identity crisis that takes place when you've been misdiagnosed for so long and things suddenly change. And it seemed like it was right in line with what you were talking about. So could you say a little more about that experience?
Yeah, so Mike was misdiagnosed 7 years. I was misdiagnosed 8 years. And when he was going through it, I honestly did not know what he was dealing with. Like, I saw him like going through it, and he was like, I don't know if I can, still be in the type 2 group. And I was like, of course you can, Mike. Like, what, like, whatever. You like, no, don't leave, like that kind of thing. And here I am in the same situation, right? And what I mean by that is, on one level, we all have diabetes. Mm-hmm. On another level, people are looking for people living with type 2 to be more active on social media. So now I find myself responding, because I'm finding like I still have little places on the World Wide Web where it says Phyllisa type 2. Mm-hmm. And so then people are like, oh, I saw that you were diagnosed with type 2. We're looking for someone in social media. Then I have to explain, like, well, yeah, I've lived the past 8 years as a person with type 2. And I have type 1. And so like it becomes confusing in that, like, where do you really fit in? And then you have people that, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. Like, they only support their type, mm-hmm. And then like, what does that mean, that you only support people with type 1? What has happened, what I find interesting, and I don't know if it's the case for Mike, maybe he can put it in the chat, but as a type 2 advocate in social media, I view the DOC like in this space, right? There's this much of the DOC. Now that I have LADA and, I'm involved in the type 1 community, it's like this. And so part of me is also feeling like, wow, like there are so many communities that we're separated from as people with type 2. Mm-hmm. And there's a level of sorrow with that comes along with it. For example, I've always wanted to go to diabetes camp. I just have. I've always, like, now, like, I see, but now I'm able to, right? Mm-hmm. Because unfortunately, most of these diabetes camps for adults, even kids, but they're like type 1 diabetes camp. So like, even filling out the application for camp now, it's like, hey, now I can go to camp. But like, I've always wanted to go to camp. I love camping, by the way. I was a Girl Scout, you know what I mean?
Wait, like in actual tents? You like camping in actual tents? All right. We might have diabetes in common, but we do not have that in common. Sorry.
You might be bougie with the camping,
I want
right?
to go glamping.
You want a cabin. That's
I
not
want
the
to be
same.
in my house, I think. I just don't want to pee outside, but that's a completely different discussion.
They have nice outhouses now, you know.
Nice and outhouses they're not the same sentence. But I'm sorry, but you were so going to diabetes camp and like, does that kind of tie back to community? Because I feel like I went to camp as a kid. So was it that community feel that felt like was opened up to you?
I definitely feel like there was a community feel that was opened up. And I see, Mike, that's been my experience as well. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There is a community feel. What's interesting is that the majority of people that have diabetes have type 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're so stigmatized. And so people don't want to talk about it. And I remember I was at a wedding one time and this woman goes to me, she goes, you know, I follow your blog. I have the D too. Oh. And I was like, you have the D? I honestly didn't know what it was. I'm light years away from whispering diabetes and coding it. And then she's like, you have diabetes. And I go, oh, okay. So I find that a lot of people, you know, read my blog posts, they follow me, but because we're so stigmatized, right? We've caused it amongst ourselves. And it wasn't until I was reading this guide to type 1 diabetes that I realized how simple that sentence is. Mm-hmm. When you open a piece of material about your diagnosis and it says within the first paragraph, it is not your fault. Mm-hmm. What that does to your mind, how that changes all the other pages that you're going to read. I have never read that in any type 2 material, ever. So already society says it's because you're fat. It's because you ate too many Krispy Kreme donuts. It's, you know, all this misinformation about what causes, you know, type 2 diabetes. So you're aware of that. The comedians are joking about it, all of this. But then when you pick up your guide to being diagnosed with type 2, and it doesn't even tell you that it's not your fault, it begins to sink deeper in.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. And so that was another thing that you had said about, obviously, the stigma about diabetes. And I also find it very interesting, and it says a lot, that when you're talking about people with type 2, you say we, and when you're talking about people with type 1, you say we, and when you're talking about people with diabetes, you say we. And I wish that was the unifying way that everybody talked about all kinds of diabetes, because that we is very, very powerful. And just to hear you talk from both sides of it as though they are the same side, it sounds like the sentence that people wish they'd read in that document that says that this is not your fault, that you are not alone, that you are part of a community and you will be supported. And so predominantly because I've grown up with type 1 diabetes, I know more people and more involved in the type 1 diabetes community if it were to be put into 2 separate buckets. But I really like the idea of one big bucket. And so how can we as a broader community help reduce stigma? How can we take like real actionable steps, from your opinion, on making this hurt less for people who are diagnosed with type 2 and making sure that they feel like camp is for them as well?
I say, one, make it inviting. So why not have it a diabetes camp? You know, but these camps don't say this is diabetes camp. It's clear it is a type 1 camp. That's it, right? And so instantly, by defining it as a camp for people with type 1, you close the door for people with type 2. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, don't put that qualifier at the end of your type 1 to differentiate from type 2. And here's what I mean by that. Here's an example. There was an organization that had this on their website, and it said, type 1 is an autoimmune disease, not a lifestyle disease. Do you hear that switch? Why couldn't they just leave it at type 1 is an autoimmune disease? Full stop, period. But to add that qualifier, not a lifestyle disease.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's these kinds of things, like, why did you add that? Why was that there? Was it there to say we aren't those type 2s? Because I read this when I was diagnosed with type 2, and I proceeded to not engage with the organization again. Now that I have LADA, they reached out to me and I told them about this and they immediately fixed it,
Oh,
which I'm
okay.
very appreciative, like immediate. Like I would say within 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Had changed.
Well done, you.
Well, I thank you.
Yeah.
And so the thing is if everyone in your organization has type 1 and this is how your messaging is designed around these little points of separation, you don't realize who you're turning off. They would have never known that I was turned off as a person with type 2 when I read that. So when I think about bridging the types, it's these kinds of things. Make camp for everybody, you know, clearly have a class on understanding pumps, you know, if that's the thing, but there are people living with type 2 that also have pumps, right? And so, you know, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a funding situation, I'm not exactly sure, but when it comes to things like putting that sting on the end, I have type 1, not type 2. My diabetes is autoimmune, not the kind that your grandmother has. You know, these kinds of little things. I see these all the time, and they just help separate.
And I mean, I think about things like that too, because as I get older, I will eventually become someone's well, I mean, my kids are young, don't say that too loud, but I will eventually become someone's grandmother with diabetes. And they're like, I don't know, you're giving me an awful lot to think about. And that is a really good thing. And I don't mean to be looking over here. I'm checking through the chat. There are a lot of people that are thankful that you're here to share your story. A lot of people chiming in also with misdiagnosis comments and saying that was their experience as well. There was one question in here about the specific tests to get to show that you have LADA or type 1. So do you feel comfortable kind of walking through a little bit about those antibody tests?
Yes, I specifically asked for the GAD65 antibody test, but there are 2 others. Perhaps someone who knows those 2 others can put them in the chat. But I asked for the GAD65, and what's interesting about my results is that they came back through the roof. So I'm interested in finding out what that means, that on a scale of 1 to 5, I had greater than 7,000. I also was given medication that I should never have been given because I found out also this endo had never ran a test on my C-peptide to find out how much insulin I am producing. Unfortunately, I was given medication that forces your pancreas to produce more insulin. And I had a reserve of 0.02%. So when we talk about the harm of misdiagnosis, oh great, someone put it in there. I think it's Mike.
It was
when
Mike.
we talk about the harm of misdiagnosis, this is the harm. Being on medication for people with type 2 that if you have antibodies in type 1, you shouldn't be on. And so also I do want to say that it was very important in the months after my diagnosis that my diabetes advocate friends held me up. So any conference that has happened since September, whether it's It's Bad in October, South Korea, anywhere I've been, I broke down. And the diabetes advocates really held me up because I was confused, didn't know what to do. I was on multiple daily injections, a minimum of 5 to 6 injections every day. The insulin pump seemed scary to me. And they were all like, no, it's the greatest thing. Like, get an insulin pump, Phyllisa. So I have to show my insulin pump. I don't have a name for her, but when it's coming. So this is her. She's blinged out.
Okay. She's lovely.
But I say that because I started this presentation out by saying, I'm happy to be smiling. And I meant that because the past few months have been horrible. And I just want to thank all the advocates that I saw and just let me cry on their shoulders. Because I did a lot of crying, a lot of feeling angry, a lot of like wondering, why did I have to fight
Yeah.
to get tested? Like, what about that? You're already drawing blood, you know, you're doing my A1C. Like, isn't it a simple blood test? I still don't know the answer to that. The only thing my endocrinologist told me, because I was adamant about this thing, I was adamant about, I did not want to take another step without her telling me why she refused the test. Because when I did go to get the insulin, you know, she was like, you have to come in and get insulin. You have to see the diabetes educator, you know, be educated on type 1 diabetes. It was now an emergency for her.
Right.
But it had always been for me since I asked the first time. And so I told her, I was like, slow down, you know, I was like, sit back down in your seat. I have one question for you. And she says, yes. I said, why did you not test me when I asked you the first time? Because now we've, you know, we're months down the line. I've clearly caused harm to myself with all the weight loss. And I mean, it was horrible. Like, I was throwing up and I was sick.
Sounds tough.
And then she just goes, I missed it, Phyllisa, and I'm sorry. This is what I got. I missed it, Phyllisa, and I'm sorry.
And from multiple providers too, because it wasn't just one. I mean, you showed your slide of all the clinicians that you'd asked for. So, I mean, for people who are sitting here and listening, and people who will watch this after the fact, there are going to be people who are in that exact same position saying, I'm asking for something. How do I make myself feel heard? So now that you are on the other side of that experience, do you have advice for somebody that might be struggling to feel heard as a patient?
I can only give you the advice that endo gave me, and that is, don't stop until you find the answer. Like, if you look at your medical records and you know that you have not had antibody testing and you've been diagnosed with type 2, just get it. And don't stop until you find the answer. I was willing to pay for the test, but the doctor had to write it, right? And I don't understand why someone would be offended by asking. And so, you know, I'm very thankful to Dr. Holly, my gynecologist, because she heard me. And then here's the crazy thing. This all started because this room of physicians heard my story. They didn't have one A1C result in front of them. They didn't have a blood. They had none of my medical records. They just heard my diagnosis story and said, that sounds like LADA. And then my own endocrinologist was not listening to me. You know, my OBGYN, she listened to me. And so that's a large part of why I was so upset, because I do think about, I had a cousin who passed away from complications of diabetes.
Oh, sorry.
And for the life of him, he couldn't get his blood sugar down. He couldn't get his blood sugar down. And there was a point after he was diagnosed, he believed that God healed him. And I wonder if he had LADA. I wonder if in the 3 years that I was managing without any medication, that was his story. But he believed God healed him. And then when he couldn't get his numbers down, no one listened to him. And they believed that he wasn't doing the right thing. They believed he was non-compliant or non-complacent. And they just, you know, like, maybe he died.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe he died having LADA. I never knew. So I cried. I gave you the warning.
I know, but I can't like hug you through the screen. So it's just becoming like a, I hope you take comfort for knowing even the vulnerability of telling your story, that you are making a huge difference for people who may be sitting in that same boat, without the guidance, and you are giving that to them, that somebody's life may change from hearing what you are saying that will bring them towards a path to better health.
So I think about all those people.
Mm-hmm.
I think about how I asked in 2017 and was told no. How I asked in 2018 and was told no. 2019 and was told no. How many other people don't know to even ask?
Right.
But they're told they're non-compliant. And they're eating right, they're exercising, and nothing is happening. And then they don't know what's wrong. So then they begin to distrust their physician.
Mm-hmm.
Then they begin to say, you know what? It doesn't matter what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to do whatever, right? And so it is emotional, as you can
Of
see.
course.
So anyone who has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, I just encourage you to keep trying to get tested for the antibodies, because until you know for sure, you don't know. And that was my thing when they asked. I was thinking, oh, I'm just going to go and ask for like paper proof I have type 2 so I can tell them, yeah, I have type 2.
But it must be difficult when you're feeling like garbage to continue to push to get answers, when you also have to deal with the fact that you feel like garbage. And throughout the Q&A here, and also throughout your discussion, you came back to community a lot and how the community has lifted you up. You mentioned Mike Durbin several times, someone who had been on this journey already and helped guide you through your process. So from your perspective, how powerful is community for people with all kinds of diabetes?
It is extremely, extremely, extremely important. And I have to say, my type 1 community, they have held it down for me, from showing me, their pump. I'm in between jobs right now. So, I've had people donate supplies to me, which I'm very, very, very thankful for. But literally, Cherise, Renza, Bastion, anybody, Anna, Mike, they've held me up. I've literally been crying worse than this in front of them, because I just did not know anyone who had the experience. So it's like being young and being diagnosed with type 2 was emotional. I would go to a family reunion and I'm the youngest person, in the family reunion diagnosed with type 2. That's lonely. Mm-hmm. Now having LADA, it's like, I'm like, where are all the people with LADA? Because like I said, some people choose to just say they have type 1 and move on. Mm-hmm. They don't, and at some point I may just say, I have type 1 and move on in a given setting. Sometimes I may feel like explaining LADA is a form of type 1 to some people, and then sometimes I may not, right? Mm-hmm. And so finding people who say, I know what it's like, means a lot when you feel so alone. Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, the first time I had ever heard LADA was from Cherise, and I'm thankful that she says I have LADA. I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know if Mike has decided. Like I said, for me, I'm fluid. It'll probably change. Hi, I'm Phyllis, and I have LADA. Hi, I'm Phyllis. I have type 1. Hi, I'm Phyllis. I was misdiagnosed. This is my current one. I was misdiagnosed with type 2 for 8 years, and I have type 1.
You're like, sit down. I have a story to tell you. Have a seat.
Because it's important for people to know about, multiple years of being diagnosed with type 2 and what that means. So on one level, that's the only identity I know. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the process of getting a new identity, right?
There's a very superhero sound to it. Yeah, it does.
Diagnosed, not defeated through it all, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, I admire that too, because the not defeated part hung off of both iterations of your diabetes life. Regardless, you were not defeated. And I really dig that, because that says a lot about people with diabetes of all kinds and their resiliency and the power of connecting with your peers and telling your story, and like what that can do to help decrease feelings of defeat. I think that's so important to say out loud. And I feel really guilty right now because I'm looking, this chat is going bananas and I haven't been able to look at any of it because I've been listening listening to you, I mean, I hope that you are looking at this. There are a lot of people really weighing in and saying how much this resonates for them and how much community has changed them and how much the power of a story and our stories makes such a difference. And that is completely true. And for those of you listening at home, we have 10 minutes left. If you have a question, now is the right time to drop in and put that in there. And I swear I'm going to read all of these and we're going to get to these. And Phyllisa, we can go through and send you all the questions that come through after the fact to make sure that things get to you. But
Perfect.
I'm just very grateful that you've come on here. And I'm really grateful that you also decided to take the route of addressing shame and stigma, because I love the idea of our community being supportive instead of divisive, and how we all benefit from that kind of support regardless of type. And that you are rattling off names of people who supported you and you ran out of breath before you ran out of names. Like that's,
oh yeah,
that's pretty powerful though. The community is good like that.
I'm very fortunate, you know, and I've always been the kind of person that has had privileged experiences and feel like I need to take whatever that experience is and give it to people who didn't have that same privilege. Mm-hmm. So when I think about me doing that workshop in front of those physicians, that was a privileged experience, right? To be the chosen patient advocate to talk to physicians from the MENA region. And what I
privileged
gained
to hear
from
you, though,
that.
so I'm not going to let that go without saying they were privileged to be able to sit there and listen to you as well, though. That privilege both ways.
What? Thank you. And so from that experience, I learned about being adamant. Mm-hmm. Because that woman knew something. You just don't tell someone and don't stop until you find the answer if you don't know that it would be a difficult task.
Right, right.
And so because I've had that experience, I'm having to tell other people. Like I feel ownership of having to tell other people, listen, if you've been diagnosed with type 2, make sure you have the antibody testing, mm-hmm. you know. And so even little things about how to navigate through the restrictions of eating 45 grams of carbs. This is what people who are with type 2, what we're told to eat. So here's something interesting. So since I've been diagnosed with diabetes, my diet has been restricted to 45 grams of carbs per meal.
Okay.
Do you know that I struggle with my pump putting anything over 45 grams of carbs in here?
Wait, you struggle to put it in, or the pump?
Because I'm like, I should not be eating 50 grams of carbs. Oh my God. What is 60? Can I really eat 62? Can I put it like, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Because I've been told, like, you know, like that's why I put up the Jamaican beef patty. You know mm-hmm. what I'm saying? Because half of that patty is about 47, grams mm-hmm. of carbs. And as a person with type 2, that's it. I have to cut that thing in half, put a smile on my face. I wish I could eat the other half, but I can't, Mm-hmm. And I'm like, holy crap. The whole thing.
I think my favorite part is when you whisper, but I can hear you. So, there's so much stigma to food and everything else that comes along with diabetes, type notwithstanding, and to have it compounded is overwhelming. Again, we need to make sure we go through this chat afterwards, because now we just have a couple minutes left. You are being encouraged by several people now to come join the Facebook page, the VFFL Hallway. So after the virtual Friends for Life Orlando event, a lot of the people who were adults with diabetes met through there, and then they started their own Facebook group. So if whoever's in the chat that's part of that group, if you want to throw a link in there, that would be great. But you have been more than once cordially invited to come join them on their
I can't wait. I look forward to it. The more communities, the better. That's my motto. Mm-hmm. The more communities, the better.
And I'll second that with also the more stories, the better. So all different types of diagnosis stories. Yours and mine were very different, but we net out to be part of the same greater diabetes community. And I find a lot of value to hearing stories that are different from mine. And I know you are in the same way, and that you want to hear from all kinds of different people. So I'm really grateful that you've taken the time today to share yours. And as we're looking at like a minute or two left, I mean, you've shared so much. I don't even want to put anything else on you and say, do you have anything else that you would like to add? But I don't want you to feel like you left anything unsaid. So is there anything that's hanging in your brain there that you'd want to get out?
No, I think I've said everything. I wanted to definitely thank the people who have held my hand. You know, just if you're out there and you have held my hand and you know it, I just want to say thank you, because I can't name everybody. I just know everybody that I saw after September, they held my hand because I needed my hand to be held. And it's because of them that I'm able to smile today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still adjusting, you know, trying to figure out pump and, you know, bolus waves and all that. I'm still figuring it out. I'm being patient with myself. And so I'm just honored to be here to share the story.
Well, we are so glad to have you. There are people saying thank you and you're welcome all over the place in this chat. I'll send you the transcript after it's over. But I am personally very grateful that you've taken the time to do this and to talk to people and to become the person that says don't stop until you get the answer for people who are still in search of theirs. So thank you for being that resource for people and for hanging out with us on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, spending a little time in front of the Zoom with me. So thank you for doing that. And for everybody at home, I'm just, again, really glad that you guys have stayed with us too. If you have questions, Phyllisa, how can they reach you? Did you want to share that last screen one more time? Because I want people to be able to connect with you if you're cool with that.
Yep, not a problem. There you go. So I'm on Instagram, Black Diabetic Info. I'm on there often, like every day. I'm on Twitter as well at not_defeated. And then I have a blog that I run, diagnosednotdefeated.com. And on there, I have a recent post of this week about a COVID attack on an airplane and trying to calm down from that. So if anyone is about to fly, planning on flying with diabetes or any of that, go ahead and check out my last blog post. But you can find me on Instagram and Twitter.
And on a personal note, I would love if you could send me the link to the video of you having a funeral for your pancreas, because I hadn't seen that one yet. And that sounds like intense. So I would love to see that.
I will send that one, definitely.
Yes, please. But so I think I'm just checking for questions, but I think we've reached the end of our hour. But just thank you for joining us. Thank you guys at home for joining us. And we'll have a video of this chat. Phyllisa, I'll make sure I send it to you, and we'll be sharing it through the CWD website. And for everybody at home, we'll be doing another Screenside Chat, not in 2 weeks, but next weekend. We have a Safe at School with Crystal Woodward chat happening on August 2nd. So if you guys happen to be home on that Sunday, please join us for that discussion. And in the meantime, take good care of each other. This story, really reinforces why we should be doing that. So Phyllisa, thank you for joining us today. And next week.
All right.
Bye everybody. Thanks.